we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Here in OneNote, just want to make sure everyone can access OneNote. Please let me know if you have any issues accessing OneNote. We're going to start week 3 now. The last couple weeks we've been talking about organization, about writing a thesis statement, right, about how to go about writing topic sentences, about a topic that we want to think about this semester. And this week, in week 3, I'm sharing with you in this first tab, this first page, formatting, some videos about formatting in Microsoft Word. So we're not going to go over the video today in class, but I would like for you to take a look at the video and think about these tips that I'm providing here when you work in Microsoft Word. Things like double spacing, indentation, what else? Headings. So I basically go through and I show you step by step how to go about formatting your Microsoft Word document. And I would ask that you follow these tips for the semester, okay, for all of the products, basically from Unit 1, our concept paper that we're working on this unit, all the way to the Unit 4, talking about the literature review that we'll develop. So I want to share this with you, take a look at it, and if you do have doubts, we can talk about it in class. But basically, it's not complicated. It's just there's a lot of little steps in Microsoft Word how to change the settings, how to change it from centimeters to inches, how to avoid extra spacing between paragraphs. All of those small details I explain and show you how to do it in these videos. Okay, probably the first video will be enough, but I've done this several times in the past over the last couple of years. So I'm including all the videos, so you don't have to watch all the videos, but I would start with this one, and I think this will be helpful. Okay, so when you're at home and you've got your computer, you can look at the tips and make those changes. Basically, you make the changes once, and then you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so I usually talk about this early on in the semester, so that again we can just do it one time, and then we don't have to think about it anymore. Okay, so I want to share that with you, formatting Word. And there's a typo here. Okay, so formatting Word. Again, this is in week 3. In OneNote, week 3, the very first page called Formatting Word. Okay, so I encourage you to take a look at that when you have a spare moment. Last week, I think we talked about a few words and phrases to avoid. So I'm including this also in this week kind of as a review, as a reminder. Take a look at this list, take a look at your own text, and see if there are any times where you're using the word people, or if there are any times where you're using the word very, or important, okay, or importantly. Make sure we're staying in the third person. So no yous and I's and we's. So we want to stay in the third person. No absolutes. Be careful with there is, there are. Okay, absolutes like always, never, everybody, everyone. Okay, so again, this is kind of a review. We'll keep adding to this list as necessary as we come up with some other examples of perhaps phrases we can avoid, but for now, this is what we have so far. So maybe take a look at that periodically as you develop your concept paper. Any questions about these words to avoid that we talked about last week?
How can you substitute the there is or there? I mean, how can you change that?
So, do you have a specific example, or do you want me to come up with?
For example, if you want to say there are some classrooms where the teacher is something.
All right. So we'll just come up with Alright, so let's look at an example of there are. What was the example you gave to me? Sorry.
There are some classrooms where teachers
Do not have enough chairs.
yeah,
Whatever.
very
Okay. Just an example. Alright, so the first thing I gotta ask is what's the subject? First of all, is this a complete sentence? Is this acceptable? Is this grammatically correct? There are some classrooms where teachers do not have enough chairs. Is this okay? Does it sound okay?
Grammatically, yes.
Grammatically speaking, yes. Grammatically
yeah,
speaking,
correct.
it is a complete sentence.
Okay.
Now, the first question, if it's a grammatically complete sentence, then it has to have two things, right? Any sentence that's complete, grammatically speaking, needs to have two things. What are those two things? Putting on our grammar hats for a moment. What's a subject and a verb or predicate, right? It has to have a subject and a verb. Do we agree with that?
yes.
So in this case, if we have to have subject, what would be the subject?
What was the question?
What's the subject of
what's the
this
subject?
sentence? Yeah, this is a complete sentence, so it has to have a subject, right? So the question is, what is the subject? Classrooms? Do we agree?
I would say.
Classrooms?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Alright. Alright, so yes, the subject is classrooms. Okay. Now, what's another way, if we have, because usually subjects come first, right? So if you say, well, what's wrong with there is, there are? What's wrong with that? Why isn't that a good sentence, right? And typically subjects come at the beginning of the sentence. And so the idea is this is not always the best type of sentence because one, the subject's not at the beginning of the sentence. It's someplace down here, right? It's after there is or there are. In this case, we can start off with the subject, some classrooms, correct? So some could be some sort of modifier, right? But the verb, the noun phrase is some classrooms, correct? Alright. What else do we have in this sentence that we're saying in the sentence? So some classrooms, but if we use strictly this information, right, we're going to kind of convert this sentence. There are some classrooms where teachers do not have enough chairs. Now, if we start with the subject, because we know that that's a better way to do things, starting with the subject, what would be the rest of this sentence using and respecting this same idea here?
Do not have enough chairs for teachers.
So some classrooms,
Do not
alright, do not, alright,
Didn't we're teaching.
For teachers, work, teach. We're missing something. For teachers.
now, I know what you're saying, right? You're saying, well, I could say some classrooms do not have enough chairs. But that's not exactly the same idea that's being expressed here because we have this where teachers, this relative clause that is, do not have enough chairs is inside this relative clause where teachers. So we can't just take away where teachers. We have to keep where teachers in the phrase. Okay. So here, some classrooms where teachers do not have. Do not is actually part of where teachers. It's not part of classrooms. It's basically saying where teachers who do not have enough chairs. It's actually an ellipsis, we call this. But anyway, this is part of where teachers. Okay, it's not part of classrooms. So, what's wrong with there is or there are? Well, what's wrong with this sentence? Some classrooms where teachers do not have enough chairs Can I leave it like that?
No.
Some teachers, where teachers do not have enough chairs. ¿Está bien? ¿Se lo dejo así?
We need something like that. What happened in the
We have a confusion because we don't know if the problem is of the classroom or is a particular opinion of the teachers.
Okay. Is this a complete sentence? The second one.
Maybe it's missing the what are the teachers doing?
Alright. Is it a complete sentence? When I say complete sentence, because we know a sentence has to have two things, right? It has to have a subject and a verb, right? So a sentence has to have those two things, right? To be a complete sentence. Is this a complete sentence? We know that this is a complete sentence, but is this a complete sentence? What's it missing?
The action.
The action. It's missing the verb. It's missing a predicate. Basically all we have is some classrooms. Because where teachers do not, this is all modifying classrooms. So that basically all we're saying here is some classrooms. That's all we're saying. And we're basically saying the same thing here. We're basically saying some classrooms exist. Saying, okay, it exists. But we're not saying anything about the subject. We're not saying anything about the classrooms descriptively or dynamically or more specifically. We're just saying, yeah, see, I have classrooms. That's all. And that's why we use there is to show that something exists. Okay, which does serve a purpose, okay? I mean, I'm not saying we never use it, but in academic writing we have to be careful, and most of the time, if we feel like we really need to use it, many times we can reword it and come up with a better sentence to serve our purpose in the text, most times. Okay? Again, I don't want to say we never use it, but I would ask that you try to avoid it certainly for topic sentences. And then, if you feel compelled to use it later on, use it sparingly. Use it if you really need to. Since this is an academic writing class, we might as well try to not use it and see if there's a better way to write it. Right? If it still respects the ideas and the message that we want to use. So, here we might, we would have to say something about some classrooms where teachers do not have enough chairs are too small in order to, let's talk about the size of the classrooms or whatever. It can be more descriptive. Maybe talk about the layout of the classroom or whatever. But it forces us to be more descriptive or more explanatory or more justifiable or whatever it is we're trying to do. So one is, how do we fix it, right? And then the other reason is, well, why would we need to do it? So this is why, just because we want it to be more descriptive or explanatory, and this is how we do it. Does that make sense? Does that help? Any other questions about any of these words or why we have to avoid or how to avoid any of these words here that we talked about last week? Yes?
Why to avoid the passive voice?
Passive voice. Because APA says so. All right, let's take a look here. Let's take a look. Very good question. Why do we need to avoid the passive voice? It sounds all right. Okay, so it has been determined. This is an example of the passive voice. Specifically, this is a special type of passive voice with this, what we call this non-referential it. It begins with it. It has been shown. It has been found. It has been determined. Now, why to avoid the passive voice? Well, in the passive voice, do we know who's doing the action? That is, do we know who determined that classes were going to be canceled? Do we know who determined it?
Well, if I mention, for example, if I say, according to blah, 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 it has been shown the students, whatever, yeah? No?
According to Ellis, it was determined that not necessarily. I mean, because we don't know that within the context of the research. I mean, just by that small example, without knowing the context, it could certainly be something else, somebody or some other entity. Like, let's say Ellis researched the university classes, and he did a study at the university, and they determined that classes were canceled, and he just published it. So it doesn't mean necessarily that the author determined it. It could have been within the study. In this case, maybe a committee determined that the classes were canceled. So it doesn't mean that necessarily that the author determined it. It's just that you're saying that you're referencing him, that he's the one that came up with this idea, that it was determined. If that makes sense, right? So Ellis does research. So Ellis does research at the university. And the university committee, the consejo, whatever, determined that classes were canceled. So he publishes, it was determined that the classes were canceled at the university. That doesn't mean that he determined it. In this case, the committee determined it. So the reason we use passive voice is because, well, maybe it's not important who determined it. Okay, that's fine. But when we write academically speaking, the active voice is preferred. All right, so I don't want to say we never use the passive voice. But the active voice is the preferred way. Why? Because we want to know who does what. We want to present the action. The agent, the one who's performing the action, needs to be usually as the subject. Why? So that we know more. So there's no question about, well, it was determined that classes, well, who determined it? Why did they determine it? When did they determine it? Who's involved in the decision making? It just provides, more information, and it's clear. And at the end of the day, what active voice, avoiding there is, there are, avoiding these very and important, it all boils down to one simple thing: writing more clearly and more transparently, so that your ideas are clear and better understood for the reader. That's really the end result. Why do we double space? Why do we have left justified text instead of, that has it automatically adjusted? Because it's easier to read. Okay, so there's no earth-shattering reason. It's not just, well, I think we'll left justify, right? It's not just an arbitrary decision. It's so that it's easier to read, it's easier to understand. And so here, to fix it, one thing is to find out when you're writing in a passive voice. The second thing is how to fix it. So how can we fix this? It has been determined that classes at the university have been canceled. How would we change this from the passive voice to the active voice?
Classes at the UA have been.
Yep. I have a, let's see if I have my, yep. And let's say that somebody actually researched this, because if we're saying it has been determined, probably we're dealing with some sort of author or something. whatever, right? If we want to say that this is coming from an outside source, this is not my original idea, you know, somebody researched it or whatever. Capital C, classes at the university have been canceled. Now we just changed it from the passive voice to the active voice. Okay? These are very easy to change. Now there are other passive voices that are a little bit more involved, but we can kind of take that on a case-by-case basis, right? I'll wait until I see more examples of that. Again, I don't want to say never use passive voice. Sometimes it's perfectly acceptable to use the passive voice, especially in the method section of your research.
In the results,
Maybe.
it's really common.
Well, it might be common, yeah, but I've seen it more appropriately used in the method section, but I've seen it way overused in the results, and I've seen it way overused in the theory. So I know this might be kind of something weird and different for a lot of us, and as some of the students think, well, it sounds more formal, right? That's usually the argument. It sounds more sophisticated and formal.
I don't think so. I think that we are take the same way that the other writers in our field, and you will start to do the same that they do, you know?
Yeah, maybe it's just out of habit.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's just out of habit. You're kind of used to doing it. That's
Yeah.
I mean, certainly. And I know my students, you know, they get this from some place, and I don't know exactly where. I've always been curious about where they learn this, because we get students in from first semester, second semester who would write a lot in the passive voice. So maybe they get it in high school, or you know, maybe in Spanish or something. I'm not sure, but yeah. I mean, for our purposes, for academic purposes, and according to APA, they have a little note there. Active voice is preferred. So this is what we want to try to focus on this semester in our own particular writing. Any other questions or doubts? One thing we didn't mention that I think it might be worth mentioning, again, I'm waiting to see more of your work. I've been going through some of your texts. So please make sure that you're uploading whatever advancements that you have, whatever text that you've developed, that you are uploading to your shared document, the document that I can also see and make comments. One other thing I'd like to mention or add to our list is try to avoid subject pronouns or personal pronouns in the topic sentence. Subject, sometimes they're called personal pronouns in the topic sentence. What are personal pronouns?
We,
Right. I'm going to say
I,
he, she, it, and they, because we also want to try to avoid first and second person. So I'm not going to put you and I and we. Okay, so because we want to try to avoid those altogether. So try to avoid he, she, it, or they, or even them, even object pronouns. It could be object pronouns. Sometimes object pronouns. But we want to try, instead of using the pronoun, now this is the topic sentence only. I don't want to say never use personal pronouns, right? But in the topic sentence, instead of saying they, or it, or he, or she, we want to state specifically what the antecedent, what it is, right? Who that person is, who they are. Okay? All right. Any more questions about, or doubts, concerns? All right, so today what I want to talk about is a little bit about unity, which is kind of a review, and coherence. When we write academically, we want to think of three different things throughout our text, whether it's at the paragraph level or the whole essay level. unity, coherence, and cohesion. Those are the three areas of writing that we want to try to respect when we develop our ideas. And unity basically is review. We've already talked about unity. And unity really is about what? What do you think about when you hear the word unity? What does that mean to you?
It means to stay on topic.
Yes, stay on topic. Unity is try not to get off topic. Right? We want to stay on topic. Now, what would that mean in an essay, a 5-paragraph essay, a concept paper? What would that look like if we want to respect unity, if we want to stay on topic? Well, we have our 4 key sentences that we talked about last week for our concept paper. What are those 4 key sentences? Thesis statement and the 3 topic sentences. That's the skeleton of our essay. That's the basis of our essay. So when we talk about unity, staying on topic, do the topic sentences align to the thesis? Do the topic sentences relate to the thesis? Or is one of those topic sentences kind of off topic? So that's one way that we look at unity. When I look at my students or any text, the very first thing that I look at, if I'm looking at a 5-paragraph essay, is I look at first the thesis statement and the 3 topic sentences. I don't start with the first sentence and read from the very first sentence to the very last. I start with the thesis and the topic sentences. What am I checking for? What am I checking? Unity. I'm checking unity. I'm seeing if it aligns. Then the second thing I check for unity is within the paragraph and looking at the topic sentence and then the supporting sentences. Do the supporting sentences align with the topic sentence within the paragraph? So unity applies at the whole essay level. It applies at the paragraph level. It could also apply at the section level if you have a very long document, longer than 5 paragraphs. So unity, this is something we've kind of already talked about, but this is basically what we mean by unity, staying on topic. Okay? Do detailed sentences support more general sentences? Now, how many of you have already started developing at least one paragraph of your concept paper? At least one paragraph? All right. If you have your concept your paragraph or your concept paper in front of you, I'd like for you to take a look at one of your body paragraphs, if you have a body paragraph. Okay, look at your body paragraph. Now, when we look at coherence, what do we mean by coherence or coherency? That's different than unity. What's coherency? Sorry?
Connectors, connection between sentences.
Kind of.
It's like to have a structure that you follow. For example, you present something, then talk about it, and maybe you develop some ideas, then you make a conclusion. You do not start with a conclusion. That'll be roughly an example.
Yes, exactly. So coherency, think about organization, think about structure, think about the way in which you want to organize your ideas. Why are you talking about this paragraph, this first topic sentence, before this one? There should be a reason. It's not just, oh, I think I'll talk about this first. There should be a reason how you're organizing your ideas. So coherency deals with organization. The way in which you're structuring your ideas. And we have a lot of different options. Okay? We can organize chronologically by date, right? Imagine if you're doing some sort of historical account of something, of some theories, and you mix up the years, right? And you go back and forth and it's not in a successive order. You might get confused. You might be like, well, why is this one, right? It may become incoherent because of the organization. You're not following or respecting certain dates. Could be a process. right? Maybe it's first you have to do this, like a recipe, right? First you add the milk, and then you beat the eggs, and then you mix the sugar in. Process. You could also organize by least important to the most important, or even perhaps the most important to the least important. You might organize by specific, general to the specific, or the specific to the general. Think of like inductive, deductive, right? Should you start with the details first and then go general? Or do you start general and then work your way more specific to specific ideas? The least contestable to the most contestable. That is, the first, maybe you start with things that few people would argue against, right? Most people would agree that these things happen, and then as you proceed through your writing, you get to things that are more contestable, more arguable, more debatable, maybe there's a stronger argument for that. Theoretical to the practical. Could be a compare and contrast, depending on if you are comparing and contrasting certain theories or ideas. Argumentative. Do you have an initial argument, a counter argument, and a rebuttal? And are you following that organization? Could be spatial. You're describing the room. First you start over in that corner, then you describe something in this corner and in this corner or whatever. Spatial, etc. There are many others. Okay, these are just a few examples. What I want to draw your attention to, though, is that these organizational patterns are not just applicable to the whole essay. We can look at each one of these for each individual body paragraph. And of course, we might mix them up depending on what it is we're talking about. For example, you have a 5-paragraph essay, like a concept paper, and you have 3 body paragraphs. And those 3 body paragraphs, you might decide, okay, I'm going to organize those 3 ideas chronologically, just as an example. So this one came before this one came before this one. But within each paragraph, let's say the very first paragraph, you might choose, you know what, I'm going to speak about the least contestable to the most contestable in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, I might talk about the least important to the most important, for example. The third paragraph, I might choose something else, maybe a process or whatever. So you can mix them depending on the ideas that you're trying to articulate. And some of these you could actually mix. For example, the compare and contrast and the argumentative are closely related. The argumentative and the compare and contrast are closely related. You can form an argument and also compare and contrast as you are forming your arguments. Okay? Anytime we compare theories, we compare authors, what they say, how they compare and contrast about what they say, that is oftentimes part of an overall argument when we're writing an academic paper. So don't think that it's all just one of these, right? They can be mixed together, and they can also be part of a different level of text, whether it's a section, a paragraph, or even a whole text, like an essay. Okay, coherence. Does that make sense? Coherency? So look at your own work, and can you identify the organizational pattern that you're using? And can be consistent? Can you recognize it? Can you develop your ideas and organize it in a systematic way here? Because again, we want to be understood. This helps the reader understand what it is what you're trying to say. If your organization is all over the place, well, guess what? The reader's going to get confused. And you're like, what? I don't understand what you're saying. And when I work with students in the BA, they have many more problems with this. This may seem very straightforward, but they have many more problems with this than they do with grammar. I mean, the grammar might be okay, but the organization is like, well, why are you talking about this? And then you jump to this, and this is off topic if we're talking about unity. Okay, so really try to see and be aware of what organizational pattern that you're using that you can identify. And even if it helps, maybe make a note off to the side of your document. Okay, this paragraph, I'm going to follow, process or a pattern or whatever. Questions about coherency? No? No questions? Piece of cake, right? Easy peasy. Yeah, looking at this is easy, right? Then when you start to write, then it becomes like, sometimes it can be challenging. So. All right. If there are no questions, then I want to do kind of an activity with you all. And this activity, you can use one of your own examples that you have already created in your concept paper. Or we can look at an example here. We can do both, right? We're going to talk today about theme and rheme. And this relates to coherency in the way that we connect ideas from one sentence to the next. Have we talked about rheme and theme? No, right? I don't think we have. So rheme and theme is a way to connect sentences, connect ideas from one sentence to the next. And let me start off by giving you an example. So let me just okay, so let's see. My keyboard is not playing nicely here. There we go. Now, if you want, you can either write down this sentence as an example or just look at your own example, however you want to do this. But we're going to talk about rheme and theme. Now, the idea is to connect ideas from one sentence to the next. So for a moment, let's not worry about if this is a main idea or if this is part of a body paragraph. Let's just take it out of context, take a look at this idea. And we want to write a subsequent sentence. We want to write another sentence after this sentence that connects this idea to the next. So I want to give you a few minutes. If you want to write this sentence out, maybe come up with a second sentence that you feel connects the idea, connects something from this sentence to the next idea. That would be a logical second sentence. You can share it with your colleagues if you're close enough. Maybe write it out, get some feedback from your colleagues, see if they agree. How would you write a follow-up sentence to some classrooms in the UA do not have enough chairs? You can do this on a notebook, you can do it on your computer, doesn't matter. Just one sentence, okay, no more. So we'll have basically two sentences, right? We're going to have this sentence and then one additional, but please no more than 2 sentences. Raise your hand if you have your second sentence. I don't want to rush you. I'll give you a few more minutes. Maybe share it with the colleagues, get some feedback. Check for grammar, punctuation, complete sentences, no there is, there are, no varies, no importances, no passive voices. What was in that? I'm so cool. Use a dictionary, find some good verbs, some dynamic verbs. Maybe a verb you haven't used in a while. Stretch your wings a little bit. Take some chances.
Dynamic?
Proofread your work, take a look at it. Okay, how are we doing? Do we have our second sentence? Raise your hand, please, if you have your second sentence. All right, we're getting there. I need a brave soul, a brave person, to add their sentence to the next, to the sentence. Repeat it. Thank you very much.
Do I just click here?
Yeah, if you click somewhere, yeah, if you click there, just put, there you go. Maybe space and then, yeah.
This is the shift here.
Where it says mayúscula.
Ah,
Or about. So, Lupita has added a second sentence. Chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning. Now, let's take a look at the first sentence. Now, we're talking about rheme and theme. Theme in rheme. Theme is what comes before, or what is already known, and rheme is the new information. So in this case, in the first sentence, what's the theme and what is the rheme? What's the theme in the first sentence? Some classrooms. Okay, some classrooms is the theme, and what is the rheme? What's the rheme?
Not having an option.
All right. The rheme do not have enough chairs. The theme is some classrooms, maybe in the university. That's the theme. The rheme do not have enough chairs. Your sentence always has some old information with new information. So in this case, the old information, or the information that came first, is classrooms. Classrooms existed before we found out that there are not enough chairs, right? If you want to look at it like that. Okay, so here we have the theme, do not have enough chairs is the rheme. Now, when we look at the next sentence, we have basically two patterns or options that we have to connect ideas from one sentence to the next. Option number one, we can use the same theme and create a new rheme. Option number one, we can use the same theme, and if you want to write, maybe write this little detail. Option number one, you can use the same theme and create a new rheme. Same theme, new rheme. Same thing, new rheme. And remember, I'm talking about going from one sentence to the next. Okay, how to go from one sentence to the next. Option number two. Option number two. We change the rheme to the theme. Option number two. We change the rheme of one sentence to the theme of the next sentence. Okay, we change the rheme of one sentence to the theme to the next. All right, so what's the first option?
Use the same
Same
theme.
theme and create a new rheme.
All right, so we use the same theme from the first sentence and create a new rheme in the second sentence. Number two, the second option?
We can change the rheme to the theme of the next sentence.
Correct. We change the rheme from one sentence to the theme of the next. Now, what option did Lupita choose? Did she choose
The
option
second
number
one.
one or option
The
number
second
two?
one. The second one.
She chose option number two, correct? Because the rheme is chairs. Now she had actually some options here for option number two. Let's think about option number two. Chairs is one option. Is that the only option?
Did you say like lacking chairs or not having chairs?
Oh yes, okay, yeah. So
But all,
right, she could have said not having chairs because the chairs were not suitable, right? Yeah, she could have had an introductory phrase, right? But she would have gotten to the head noun primarily, or the idea first of chairs, and then gone into something else. All right, so option two, this is option two. Now, if we consider in the university as being part of the theme, what's another option instead of, what would be another option with option number one now? Sorry, option number one, yes.
Some classrooms in the UEA are too small.
All right,
They only can have 25 students per class.
okay. So some classrooms are too small, blah, 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 blah. Some classrooms are too small. So in this case, Alma chose which option? Option number one or option number two? Option number one, she just repeated the theme in the prior sentence. Now, she could have done something else and still used option number one, perhaps. Although, maybe I won't say that. Let me back up. Forget that. All right. So, chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning. Those are basically the only two options. Okay, do you repeat the theme or do you change the rheme and create a theme? If you do this one thing, if you understand rheme and theme, and you connect your ideas like this, your ideas flow a lot better. Okay, we don't want to introduce an idea in the second sentence that's not clear from this sentence. It gets kind of, well, están brincando las ideas, right? You're jumping around your ideas. Now, now let's take another, let's try this one more time here. Let's take a third sentence. Now you can use this example, of course, or you can use your own example. Okay, write out a third sentence based on what you have so far. Find out if you chose option 1 here, choose option 2. If you chose option 2 here, choose option 1. Continue in your text for a third sentence. If you can, try to avoid the verb to be, just for the heck of it. Try to use a different verb. Check with your colleagues, see if you agree that you're using one option, that you're using two different options. One option to go from the first to the second sentence, and then the second option, a different option, to go from the second sentence to the third. Yes.
We do not know which option she chose.
Ah, okay.
Because the solution is different.
Some questions shares. One way to solve this problem is to organize classes. Alright, so your question is from the first to the second sentence?
Uh-huh.
Alright.
What did she do?
Alright, so the question is, what do you think the problem is?
Not having chairs.
Alright, so is that in the theme of the ring? See that? Now, we haven't talked about that. I was going to talk about that later, but you're using now what's kind of a synonym. The problem, you're saying, which is now, and it's clear in this case, that not having enough chairs. So you're using a synonym, and you can use that. Well, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that's an example of option number 2. Now you can try to use option number 1 to go from the second sentence to the third. Okay, Lupita, do you mind adding a third sentence? Your third sentence here? space. Right before, yeah. Okay, so let's look at Lupita's example. So we've already determined that the second sentence, she's basically taking the rheme, changing it to the theme. Now she needs to follow the same theme. So chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning. Not having enough chairs influences students' behavior, such as concentration. In the third sentence, what's the theme? What's the rheme? What's the theme? What's the rheme in the third sentence?
The thing, not having enough. Sure.
Alright, so the theme is not having enough chairs. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Right? And then what's the new information?
Then
The
caption.
behavior of the
The impact.
students.
Influences students' behavior such as concentration, basically everything else. That's the new information. Not having chairs, that's the prior new information. And what is she doing? She, instead of just saying chairs, she's saying not having enough chairs, which is also fine. It doesn't have to be exactly the same word. In fact, it can be a synonym. Should we talk about this? Let's talk about it. Why not? Alright, so let's take a look at. All right. Let's take another look at a similar example. I think Patricia had an example here that's worth mentioning here. So let's take a look. Oops. Okay, I think Patricia had something like this.
One way to solve.
One of the what is it? What did you have?
What I put, it was one way to solve this problem is to organize classes.
One way to solve this problem is to organize classes. So, here's another example. If we say chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning, one way to solve this problem is to organize classes. Which pattern is she using here? Pattern option number 1 or option 2 with regard to reading?
Assumption two because you will start with some
I'm sorry, I
they
think
will not have enough shares.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, wait one second. This is actually the first sentence.
Yes.
Sorry. My mistake. Yeah, let me get rid of this. Okay, so let's look at this example again. Sorry. Some classrooms in the UA do not have enough chairs. One way to solve this problem is to organize class. Now, is this an example of option 1 or option 2? How many people think it's option 1? Nobody? How many people think it's option 2? How many are not playing? Yes, option 2. What's the problem here? What's the problem?
Not have enough shares.
All right. So this would be an example of using kind of a synonym, although it's not one word, but it's synonymous. A synonym. So one way we have this keyboard does not want to work. Synonyms. Synonyms, hypernyms, and hyponyms. Synonyms, hypernyms, hyponym. Now these are just big fancy words, but they're very simple. We have synonyms. What does synonyms mean?
Synonyms. Similar means different words.
They have different words but similar meanings. Okay? So we have synonyms. Now, hypernyms and hypo. So hyper, what's hyper and what's hypo? Which is which? Hyper. Yeah. Hyper.
It's very big.
Like high or hyper, like above, like hypertension, high blood pressure.
It does have something
Yeah,
that
or
rises.
hyperglycemia. Okay, so we have hyper and hypo. Now, let's look at some examples here. We have a word animals and cats. Okay, animals and cats. So let's just take that as an example.
Animals is a hypernym.
Animals is a hypernym.
And cats is a hypo.
We'll just use animal in the singular. Animal. I see. Animal is a hypernym of cats, or cat. Cats is a hyponym of animals. Well, we'll keep it in the plural. Animals and cats. Okay. Animals. Okay, see? Alright, so we have, it's called word families, right? So you could say cities, Aguascalientes, right? Cities is a hypernym of Aguascalientes. Aguascalientes is a hyponym of cities. So we have synonyms, hypernyms, hyponyms. Now, why is this important? Why do we even need to think in terms of synonyms, hypernyms, and hyponyms, these word relationships? Well, just as Patricia has done here, she chose to use a synonym. But she could have also chosen perhaps maybe a hypernym or a hyponym of classrooms, or a hyponym or hypernym of chairs, or a hyponym or hypernym of university. Okay? So it doesn't always have to be exactly the same word. We can also use pronouns.
Pronunciation of each word because I can hear the difference.
Okay, so we have hyponym, 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 and hypernym. Hypernym, hyponym. You hear the difference? Hypernym is going to be number 1, hyponym is going to be number 2. So I'm going to say the word, you indicate which one that I say. Hypernym. I'm going to say it again. Hypernym. Listen again. Hypernym.
Hypernym is what?
Yes, hypernym is 1, hyponym is 2. Sorry. Hyper, hypo. Hyper, hypo.
Okay.
2. Alright, let's try it again. Alright, I'm going to say the word, and you tell me which word that I say. Hyponym.
2.
I'm going to say it again. Listen. Hyponym.
2.
Okay, I'm going to say another word. Hypernym. Hypernym.
1.
Hypernym.
1.
Hyponym.
2.
Hyponym.
2.
Synonym. Alright. Hypernym, hyponym, hypernym, hyponym. So all of our words, right, they have these word families. They have the hyper and hyponyms of each other, right? So as long as you're using hypernyms, hyponyms, synonyms, or even direct, we call direct repetition, we're using the same word, or pronouns. Esas son las opciones. Synonyms, hypernyms, direct repetition, and pronouns. We have all those options available. Now, some options might be better than others, but those are the options that we have to connect rheme and theme. All right? So we have a lot of different options when we talk and use these ways to connect our ideas. But we want to be deliberate. We want to see how can we connect ideas. If I give you feedback and I'll say something like, you're kind of jumping around, right? The ideas don't flow. This is kind of what we're talking about, rheme and theme. This is an easy way to really transition from one idea to the next. Okay? Questions? No? All right, let's take a look at one more thing, since we're here. All right, I'd like for us to look at this sentence. And sometimes when I give feedback, I may say, okay, you have these two sentences are really well written, but is there a way that we can combine those two sentences? So I'd like to give you a few minutes. Take a look at this example and see if there's a way that you can individually combine these two sentences. And then I would like for you to compare what you have with your colleague. So think about look at these two sentences. Is there a way that we can create one sentence with these two ideas and still respect the same idea that we stated? Okay, volunteer to provide us one sentence. Oh, volunteer? And you can add it like right here below. It doesn't work. You can just like. I don't know why. I think the battery's dying. What do you think? How can you finish? Any suggestions about how to finish this? Them? You do not have enough
Enough of them. Of them.
of them?
Of them.
Por qué them?
The church.
The classroom.
No. The church. The church.
Chairs.
Can we use chairs again?
Chairs are part of the, but some classrooms do not have enough chairs. Okay, all right. So what do you want to go with? Chairs or them? Chairs.
But
How do you want?
I would say chase, but not repeat chase.
Okay. So the chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning, but some classrooms in the UA do not have enough of them. Period. Right? Okay. All right. So, ¿qué opinan? ¿Está bien? Somebody's going to read this, and they need to understand, right? That's the objective, to understand what we're saying. Are we okay with this, or are there any suggestions about maybe?
You can study sensitive chairs.
Is there anything that could be misleading or misinterpreted or confusing with this example? Or is it okay the way it is? Because this is what you need to ask yourself when you look at each of your sentences. Is this clear, or could it be confusing or misinterpreted in some way? Is this okay, or is there anything that might be confusing?
As to because chairs and studied the sensitive chairs.
This one here?
Yeah.
You're saying D is not necessary? Chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning, but some classrooms do not have enough of them.
It could be confused with the classroom conditions.
All right, so let's take one by one. What do you guys think about the? Do we need the article? This is called an article, a definite article.
We don't need the.
Do we need it?
No.
Or would it be better without it, or does it matter?
We don't need it.
We don't need it?
No.
So we can say chairs are part of the classroom. What's the difference between saying the chairs are part of the or chairs?
We're
The
specifying.
specific chairs.
The chairs is
No problem.
And in general,
No problem. He's just like, no pasa nada. Yeah. Right. So, all right. So we don't know the context, right? We don't know exactly the context, what came before this. But if we just read it like this, certainly we could say chairs without the article, right? But it depends on the context. Right? If we were talking about specifically on before the chairs, then we probably would need the article. But certainly, yeah, we can leave it out or we can use it. Now, conditions. I'm gonna say something about conditions. Do we need to change something, or what, is there something confusing there? Or something else in the sentence? Is there something? Sorry?
Classroom environment, classroom.
Chairs are part of the classroom environment,
Environment settings.
a part of the classroom setting. Okay, all right. Possibly we can change this from conditions if we want to talk about environment. Okay. Anything else? There's something here for me that stands out as being possibly confusing to the reader, just as it is.
Them.
And why them? Why could that possibly lead to confusion?
Because
It's not
shapes.
The difference
Wait,
between classrooms or
Instead of using up there, we can say seats.
All right, but first of all, I want to make sure we're clear why this could be confusing. So it could be because them, what is them? It could be chairs, it could be conditions, it could be classrooms. Now, if we talked about something before, it could even be more things. So the point I want to make here is when you use pronouns, whether they're object pronouns like them, these are object pronouns, or even personal pronouns, that it's very clear what we call the antecedent, what it's referring to. Okay, because if there's any confusion in the pronoun, then we lose it. We lose the meaning. So be very careful with pronouns. Yes, you can use pronouns, but be very selective. Be very careful in how you use them. So now, how do we fix it? Now that we know why this is not the best option, now how do we fix this?
We say synonym for
All right.
sure.
Now, let me ask this first. Can we just say chairs? Can I say chairs again here?
We could.
yes.
We could.
Is that the best option? Is there anything wrong with it? So, chairs are part of the classroom conditions for teaching and learning, but some classrooms in the UAA do not have enough chairs.
It's better.
Maybe to change.
Is it, what do you guys think? Is it okay to use chairs twice in this situation?
We prefer to change,
Oh, change for
maybe
seats.
to put.
Why?
Because I don't know the word in English, but it's cacophonic.
No,
I'm not sure what that word means.
Oh,
For me, it sounds repetitive.
it's the same.
All right.
Repetitive is cacophonic.
It sounds repetitive
Yeah.
to have it in the same sentence. Now, before I said, well, you can use direct repetition. Yes, you can use direct repetition. That is, you can repeat words sometimes when you're going from one sentence to the next, but you do have to be careful to not repeat it too often. And when you're talking about one sentence, you don't want to sound repetitive. So, another option instead of chairs, instead of them.
Seats.
Seats. So chairs are part of the should not have enough seats. Okay, could be another word, synonym, use a synonym. Any other options? Someplace
places.
Places.
do not have enough places, okay? So think about the synonyms, the hyponyms, and the hypernyms of what?
Chairs.
Think about hypernyms, hyponyms, or synonyms. Synonyms, hyponyms, or hypernyms of chairs that are most appropriate, right? That you can replace, that you can put here. So we're going to be talking about hyponyms, synonyms a lot. Try to be thinking about different options that you can use to connect your ideas. And I think we're out of time. For this week, our objective is to have something in our shared Word Online documents. We need to have at least by now our 4 sentences and at least, I would say, 1 paragraph. We want to try to finish our essay by next week. By next week. Now, I would like, I'm sorry? How many paragraphs for our concept paper?
3.
How many paragraphs? How many paragraphs for our concept paper?
This one is the introduction.
One is
Right.
Body
Right.
paragraphs.
Right?
The final is conclusion. Or
Yes.
conclusion?
Yes. And we haven't been talking a lot about the conclusion yet, but I want to focus mainly on those 3 body paragraphs. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I want to try to finish this concept paper for next week, next Friday, not this Friday. But I want to have your first draft as soon as possible so that I can give you feedback. Now we can work in 2 ways, and it's up to you how you want to do this. You can ask me for feedback and I can give you feedback throughout the process, or you can draft your first draft, ask me to give you feedback on everything, and then have time to finish the final draft. Now if you choose the second option, you'll need to finish your first draft by, I don't know, next Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, to give you time to finish. Now I know we don't have class next Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. You can send me emails at any time to check your work. Okay, so you evaluate how you want to receive feedback from me. If you feel more comfortable working and drafting out the whole text first, that's fine, or little by little, whatever you want me to look at. If it's 1 sentence, I'll do 1 sentence. Just ask me and let me know specifically what you want me to check. That's important. Like if I have the whole paragraph, let me know, or the whole essay, tell me to check everything, or tell me just to check the first paragraph, or tell me to check whatever, thesis, so that I'm giving you the right information that you want. Okay, but our goal here is to try to finish this 5-paragraph essay by next Friday, not this week, but next week. Okay, so we'll have time in class, right? But try to get some work done, and feel free to email me for feedback. Okay, thanks guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.